Again, the list of supplies. This is part 2 of the onion tutorial. The reference photo again, and then the finished painting. So we will start where we finished on part 1. This is Ultra Blue from Dr. P.H. Martins. I cleaned the palette now because I don't want to use any more of that blue because it soaked into the paper so much. It just absorbed it so quickly that I don't want to necessarily use that again. I will be very careful wherever you use that. Mix it with quite a lot of water and then dilute it a lot. For this part, I just want a little bit more of that quinacridone rose with the perylene maroon and the ultramarine blue or ultra blue mix. And then I just want to darken the bottom section there. I'm not going to take it too dark because I want it to stay as light and translucent as possible. So I'm just slowly layering all of these little sections, and then I want to darken that section there where the skin of the onion folds over. So just tiny little brush strokes. I don't want to lift any of the pigment that I painted previously. It is completely dry now. So I'm just slowly layering those little sections there. Just want to darken it. So keep your water mix quite diluted. I want a distinct difference between the two colors. So the top part of the onion skin is quite dark, and then that bottom section I want to keep as light as possible. And as you can see, that is the mix that I have on my palette now. And I'm just going to slowly draw these tiny little lines with the tip of my brush. I want it to look like the skin of the onion is translucent. Just take your time. If you're scared you're going to mess it up, then I suggest that you wet that section first and then wait for it a few seconds to dry, and then go in when there is nearly no sheen on your paper. That way you'll be able to lift it. Or you can just use your little scrubber brush if you want to remove some of the little lines that you painted and you don't want it necessarily on certain sections. On the top part there, I just leave little parts of the bottom layers of the onion that I already painted. So you'll see some of the first layers shine through. So I leave little gaps in between those little lines. And then I just go back and I soften some of them. Not completely, just with the tip of my brush. I still want you to see the difference between those little lines and the transparent skin that is going to shine through. And I like the way that the ultra blue made this little dark spot on the onion. I'm going to paint over that again at a later stage. You will hardly see that, but I just don't want to add any more of that ultra blue. I keep on saying ultramarine blue, but it's ultra blue of Dr. P.H. Martins. I will, however, use some of my tube just to this is a different blue. It's phthalo blue that I picked up, and you can use that instead of ultramarine blue. If you have ultramarine blue, you can use ultramarine blue. And then I just go over those little lines that I painted earlier again, just to darken them. So that mix is quite dark, as you can see, and then I leave little gaps again on that section as well. Just careful the tip of your brush, and then I want to darken this section here, and then I just use my brush to soften those little lines. I want it to stay as transparent as possible. I have a little bit of a problem with my mic that I use for the voiceovers, so if it's a bit quiet, it should be fine now because I fixed it. And again just go over all of those little darker lines. I do apologize for the first section, it might have been a bit quiet. I will try my best to adjust the sound on that one. I will have to get a new mic because sometimes when I record and I go back to listen to that part again, all the sound is gone. It's like frustrating, but it's 2 years old already. I ordered it when I started the Patreon school, so I think, you know, maybe they don't last very long. For this part, I'm just adding a little bit of detail there. Now for this onion, I'm not going to go and add too much of the detail. This is an onion that I want to keep very simple for, especially for beginners. We'll paint more in-depth detail on certain flowers, but for now we want to focus on beginners. So it's going to be very easy, but looks still very realistic. And then the mix again is the Perylene Maroon mixed with a Quinacridone Rose and a drop of the Ultramarine. And just use a brush to soften it and wet that section there, because now we want to add a little bit more of the detail, go a little bit darker in certain sections. And I absolutely love the way that skin of the onion lifts up right here so that it's not too dark, so it still shines through quite a lot and still translucent and transparent, so I don't want to go too dark. What I love about professional watercolors is they are all very translucent and transparent, most colors that I try and add in my paint palette. So I love it because it looks like you can see through some of the colors, especially if you keep it very watery. Not all colors are translucent or transparent, but most of them are that I paint with. For this I use the alizarin crimson mix. I think the little wobbler is going to come to me now as soon as she notices I'm here. She's so cute. So this is the left hand side of the onion, and I want to paint in a drop of that alizarin crimson just to brighten that section a bit. I'm going to leave that to dry then, and then I will go over with another layer of paint. So as you can see, I wet this part quite a lot. There is a few puddles. I'm going to leave all of those to soak into the paper. And I also wash that highlight so that I can soften those little lines that I painted in earlier. I need some tissue paper just to dab it up. I want to keep that highlight as light as possible. And then I take that alizarin crimson also over that part of the skin that's loose there of the onion. And as you can see, the staining ultra blue mix that I use from Dr. P.H. Martin's does not move one bit. It is so staining, which is understandable. A lot of watercolors are very staining and you have to accept that. But what this is going to do is going to help with that shadow part on that side of the onion. So I'm not sorry that I've added it in, because it will make that section much darker and it will create that beautiful realistic look that I want. So by adding this dark mix over this now, it will just help to create a much darker purple mix on this side now. So I'm going to take it very dark. In this mix there's a little bit of the blue as well. And like I said, I will be a lot more aware of the palette in view. I will have to stand up and look on the actual arm that holds the camera to make sure that everything is in view, because I wanted to zoom it in and didn't realize that the palette is not in view. So I'm going to try and move it all up to the so that everything is on the left hand side so I can keep it in view. I didn't realize that it's not all in view, but I will explain all the colors that we use all the time. I picked up a smaller brush now. We want to go in with a darker mix. Now on the top where you can't see the palette is the mix with the ultramarine blue in. So it is the quinacridone rose with a little bit of the ultramarine blue. You can use Payne's Grey if you prefer Payne's Grey, and you'll see that the color, the purple, is quite a cool color. It's not a warm color that I use for the shadowy sections, so it's a very cool color. You can use sepia if you prefer. It will just make it slightly warmer, but it's up to you. So I'm trying to create those little lines, but I'm going to add it very carefully. So I want a brush with a very, very nice tip. And then I just used my big brush with clean water just to soften those lines. I want to be careful because, like I said, it is a staining color. And if you go in too dark too quickly, it will be very difficult to remove because there is a little bit of that blue, ultramarine blue in the mix. Just want to add in the detail on the side there. The consistency of the paint is very thick. And I just want to darken that again. I leave certain parts light. I don't take this color all over that place or that whole section. And this section is a little bit darker that I can see on the top of the onion there, so I just go in with the same mix, a little bit more watery but darker, to paint over there on the onion on the top part. I want to feel that that is dry before I go in, so I'm just going to wet it again. I don't want to wet this part if my paint was still wet, because I don't want to disturb the bottom layers. It's very important. It's one thing that I don't want to do when my paint is about to dry. You don't want to re-wet it immediately. Make sure that your painting is bone dry before you go in and add the next layers, because you will disturb the bottom layers. And that is the secret to beautiful translucent and transparent watercolor paintings, is when you leave your painting to dry completely. If you're scared, rather leave it to dry. Wait a few seconds, take your hair dryer and then dry your painting, and then go back and paint over it. But always make sure that your painting is completely dry. And then I just lift out certain sections of the pigment that I painted. I don't want to go in too dark too quickly, so I just use the brush with clean water and I just remove some of the pigment. I'm going to wet the bottom part there, so I take it section by section. I just want to move some of that pigment down. As you can see, it's already stained certain parts there. And this is how far we are now with this onion. We're going to start with the next section now. I'm going to use the exact same colors that we used earlier, and I'm just going to darken the bottom part of this onion here. This is my number 3 Da Vinci brush. These brushes are so old. I bought them so long ago. If you look after these expensive sable hair brushes, they will last a very long time. If you prefer to use synthetic brushes, that's fine too. They also last very long if you look after them. I love both brushes, both different types of brushes for different things that I paint. I don't mind the synthetic hair brushes either. It's just that this brush is, I bought it and I'm going to use it because it holds quite a lot of water. It has a nice tip and they last very, very long. So you'll notice immediately after I finish with my paintings, I rinse my brushes immediately and I put them flat on tissue paper so that they can dry. I don't let them stand up. I have a video where I share how you look after your brushes, and I would highly recommend that If you do have very expensive brushes, that you care for them, because they will last you a lifetime if you look after them, especially if you don't scrub with them often. I use different brushes for scrubbing. I don't use these brushes for scrubbing. So I take my time because there's quite a lot of detail at the bottom of this onion, and I don't want to paint in sections where I shouldn't. So you'll notice that I stop and I look at my reference photo, and then I go back and I add more detail. So this is where we are now. I took a little bit of a break quickly, and I had a cup of tea, and I came back, and we're gonna start with the next part of the onion now. Also want to adjust the light. The sun comes through the blinds now. It's a little bit warmer. Still cold today though, but it is winter and we do have a lot of rainfall during this time, so I just have to accept that the light's not going to be as brilliant as it always, but at least you can still see what I'm doing. It's just a different little bit of an ambiance here while I paint. So I took my very big number 8, I think it's an 8 or number 7 Da Vinci brush. Yes, it's number 7. That brush is also, oops, I'll just pick it up with my finger. Just if you are quick enough, you will be able to remove the pigment, and that's fine. I want a very big brush where I can pick up quite a lot of the pigment and water, so I can paint on that section. And then I just use my tissue paper to remove some of the pigment if I go into the highlighted section where I don't want any of the pigment. And as you can see, I just have clean water on my brush, and I'm going to mix that same mix now with the quinacridone rose. Let me do that again. The quinacridone rose with the French ultramarine or the ultramarine blue, and it's exactly the same mix. And I want to darken this section again. I'm going to be very, very careful. Now I want to show you what happens if you, for instance, go over something. One day I'm going to make a video where we're going to have 2 parts, where I'm going to show you if you go in and your paint is still wet on your paper and you don't wait, and I'm going to show a section where if you wait and you let it dry completely, what the difference is on the paper, so that I can show you exactly why we wait for the paint to dry completely on your paper. If that makes sense, you will see the difference when I make that video. I want to drop in a bit more of the quinacridone magenta. It's a beautiful color. These are the core watercolors, and it's a single pigment, this quinacridone magenta. I absolutely love this color. It's very, very pretty to use. But again, you can use the I'm just trying to show all the different colors that you can use and that you can get away with. You can use the quinacridone rose with a little bit of the ultramarine. So just get your mix very similar to mine. Play around with it on a scrap piece of paper until you get the exact same color, or even if it's slightly different, it doesn't matter. I did not add the quinacridone magenta on part 1's supply list. It is on part 2. And I just want to show the difference in the 2 colors that you can use, so that you can play around with whatever colors you have in your on your palette or in your paint box. You can play with loads of colors to get to similar colors that I'm using on this onion. You don't have to use what I use, but if you're a beginner and you want to follow everything that I do, then you can play around with all of these colors that I mentioned while we are painting. And I'm just dropping in this color everywhere, and then just flick it around with the brush At this stage, I'm just darkening all the tonal values. So I just go back and I check all the little parts where I want to darken certain sections of my onion or my painting. And then where I want to keep certain parts light, I just remove the paint if I paint into those sections. I don't want to go into the highlighted section, so I want to leave it as light as possible for now. And I keep on wetting my painting, because if you go in with this staining paper, now I moved up so that you can see the palette. I can just show you, and this is again the alizarin crimson mix, and I just use it at the bottom there on the onion there so that it can still shine through. Now the quinacridone magenta is also a beautiful color. I will do a color swatch to show the colors, and so that you can see the difference between the color mixes. I think that will be easier. Just for beginners, I will make a note on my pad there so that I can do a color swatch. Just trying to get to the right consistency of color there. So it's basically a purple, like I wanted very dark purple mix on there, and then I also drop a little bit of that color in the Perylene maroon mix there, because one side I want to have a little bit more of a red, and on the other side I want a bit more of the purple. So I want to darken that bottom part of the onion where the skin moves away from the onion, and by doing or by painting a much darker mix there, it will create that look like it's moving away from the onion, like there's a little bit of a fold and a shadow in there. And also there, but I'll still want to use my brush just to soften those hard lines, and as you can see immediately it looks like the skin is falling away from the onion. And then I just take the tip of my brush and I move it around there, and even though the paper is still wet, so I just take the brush in my hand and I flattened it to wash those little colors. I don't want it to flow too far on top of the onion or into the onion above that section. I want it to stay near where the skin is lifting away from the onion, if that makes sense. Again, just use the tip of my brush to soften those lines. You're just adding in all those little fine details now. Again, flatten my brush. There's not a lot of water on my brush. And as you can see, it just creates a skin that it looks like the skin is moving away from the onion. And then I just soften it very carefully, because I don't want, if I have too much water on my brush, the pigment will just flow all over that whole section that I want to keep as light as possible. So I'm very, very careful that I don't have too much water on my brush. I want to darken this bottom section of this onion here now. And you can just see that it just creates this beautiful dark part on the onion where it looks like the onion skin moves away. Again, it is so amazing what you can create with your brush and a little bit of pigment. And now I want to be careful, and I'm going to go to the top part. I'm going to leave the bottom section to dry completely before I go back and add more detail. So just want to darken those little lines, and you can see immediately it just creates this beautiful realistic look on your onion by darkening certain sections on the onion. We sometimes, as a beginner, we are all scared to go back with a too dark mix. And sometimes that's all you need, is just to take a chance and just to darken it, and then you'll see it looks a lot more realistic than what it would have looked if you didn't take that chance. And don't want the lines to be too straight, so I just wiggled my brush slightly. The paint is dry now, so now I'm going to use the tip of my brush. The brush tip might be a little bit too thick. If it is, I will just use my brush to remove some of the pigment, and I use the tip of my brush just on the one side of the marking that I painted. I'm not going to take it all over yet. I first wanted to soak into the paper before I go over with a nice wash. So just certain sections I'm going to drop in these little lines, and if I'm not happy with a line, I can go back and remove it. And you just soften it with clean water. So even though the onion have quite a lot of these little markings, I'm not going to add it all in. I want to keep it very simple, very short, not a short tutorial, but very simple and short and easy for beginners. So that's why I'm not going to go in and paint in all the detail exactly, but it's still going to look very realistic. I also want to follow the shape of the onion because it's very rounded. If I just go in with straight lines, it will not look realistic. It will not look 3D. It will look like a flat object on paper. So we want to make it look very realistic, and you can see just by adding the rounded little shapes on the onion there that it already look very realistic. Take it in over that section too. Not going to take it right down to the bottom. Section again, and if the lines go to the top, it will be very narrow, where on the bottom they will be wider apart. And then I just go over with a clean brush, and I want to soften those little markings. I don't want it to be too dark. You can always go back later and darken it again. Now we want to paint in a little bit more detail on the top there. So this is the Perylene mix with the ultramarine that I paint in, that I have on this little section here. So I want to create a distinct difference between the top part of that onion skin and then the bottom part where it's very translucent. And then there's a marking on the onion, and again I just soften the bottom of that marking. I don't want to take the whole mark away, so just the bottom part. I want to darken this section again. And just use your brush to soften the paint. A little bit more of a darker section on that side of the onion. Another little line. And then immediately with a brush over that line, so I don't want it to be too dark. Now I'll have to go in and create that detail that I can see on the onion there. So I'm just going to take my time and just not going to follow the lines exactly because I can't see the pencil lines anymore, but I'm just going to paint in what I can see as close to as possible to what I can see on the reference photo. The onion skin is falling away from the bottom layers there. And now we're just creating all of the detail very carefully. I just wet it. Still want it to be very light. And my little scrubber brush, because I dropped a little bit of that pigment on the paper and it is very staining, so I don't want it to stain the paper, so I just go in there with my little scrubber brush. Another little line. this is the fun part of painting, adding in all of these little detailed sections. And then all of those little lines, I just want to go and softly add a few in. And this is how far we are right now with the onion. I like the way it looks. It looks very realistic. So I'm going to leave it to dry for a second. Have a look, just standing up and looking at the onion, and I want to see where I must add in a bit more detail. So I want to add a few more little lines that it looks like, because if you look at a real skin on an onion, there are some of those little markings that you can see on the skin as well, even though it's not attached to the onion. And I just soften those lines because it's already stained the paper. You can hardly see them. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to darken this part. That is also a piece of skin that comes away from the onion. So let's darken a little top part of the skin. And then yeah, I want to darken that section, and then I'm just going to wash it away with some of the clean water on my brush. And you can just hear the little sugar birds outside having fun. There are loads of little babies in the garden. I gave them clean sugar water yesterday, and I hid it away from all the other weavers in the garden, so I will show you exactly where I moved the sugar water soon. Again, just soften that. Again, I'm just taking my time, adding in the detail, darkening these little sections on the left hand side of the onion, because I can still see some of the blue that shines through. So this is just again that dark mix with the quinacridone. You can use a quinacridone magenta with the ultramarine or the ultra blue, or you can use the perylene maroon with a little bit of the ultramarine blue or ultra blue mix. And then I just soften it because I don't want to see all of those little dark markings of the blue. Yet I'm glad it is there because it really helped to create that dark shadows. I would have had to paint quite a lot in there if it wasn't there. And then I just take my brush and I move it around. Quite happy with how this looks, or how it turned out. And I'm using the same mix that we used earlier for the bottom of the roots on the onion. So the yellow ochre with a mix of that transparent yellow or nickel azo yellow, both colors are the same pigment. So you can use whatever you have. You can even get away with a little bit of lemon yellow for this mix. And I dropped in a very, very tiny drop of the Payne's grain mix in there. And the roots, I just added a little bit of longer roots on the onion because it looked quite funny, but you don't have to. You can follow the reference photo exactly. You can also adjust the reference photo or the line drawing that I gave you. You don't have to add in all the detail that I always add in. Just remember that too. You can keep it as simple as possible. But I just wanted to add a little bit more of longer roots on the onion. For the photo, the one that I took, the roots were very folded into the top of the onion. And then I just use a very big brush and I want to darken the rounded part of the onion that shines through that layer of the skin. drop the same color mix in there, take it all over there, and that will create that 3D rounded look on, or realistic look on the onion. And we are nearly done. Just going to soften some of the lines quickly with a big brush. I have my tissue paper handy, just lifting out some of the pigment. I want that just to soften those little watercolor markings. And I just use the tiny little scrubber brush in little tiny circles just to soften the highlighted section there, and use a tissue paper to lift up all the excess pigment. So just remove some of the little markings that I don't like on the painting. I took a purple pencil, just a normal school pencil if you have any with the same color, like a purple or a dark pink, and then I just drew a few little markings, but you don't have to do that. You can use your brush to draw in or paint in those tiny little markings on the onion. And this is the finished painting. I think I'm done with the painting now. I don't want to add too many details on this onion. I want to keep it very simple, very easy to paint for anyone. So this is how far we are. I'm going to leave it to dry quickly. And this is the finished painting. And then all the colors that I used on this onion. We had a weekend of rain and the sun came out, and I'm going to just add a few little darker details on this onion, and then this onion tutorial is finished and I will start editing it as well. What is that? And now I'm going to remove the painting from the Arch hot press watercolor block, and I just use a flat object and I just push it in on the side there and I move it around, and then I take it off completely. You can write your name on there and you can store it in a safe place. Thank you for joining me, and I hope to see you soon with a new tutorial. Have a lovely day. Bye.